Now, I had a question from someone via WhatsApp before. These presentations will be made available after the conference, most of them. You'll get sent a link and you can then view them online and go through and grab whatever you want from them. I'd now like to invite up on the stage Georg Schmiel. I've known Georg for 25 years, a bit more or less, going way back to when we worked together in McKinsey & Company back in Melbourne. And he's had a very, very exciting journey through the online real estate world and classifieds world in general. And he's now the executive chairman of Jiu'ai IQI, co-founder as well. I see your title has grown. And I'd like to invite Georg up onto stage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and it's great to be back here. I was last here, like everyone, 3 years ago, and I introduced you to Jiu'ai IQI, which at that time had just been formed, and within 2 months after bringing together a portal and a transaction business, an app-based transaction business, we faced COVID, so our model was put really on the test. So we'll talk a bit about what happened over the last 3 years. But before we start, I want to say we all in this room, we are rock stars. Why do I say that? Because we operate in an industry which is really, really big. $326 trillion is the global value of real estate. And if you compare this to what Sleepy Joe runs in the US and in other places, that's only 85 trillion, the GDPs added together. And Scott Holmes' best friend, Sam Friedman, was only looking after 1.1 trillion of cryptocurrency. So this is really a big market. And because it's such a big market, it has a massive amount of annual revenue potential. Back at REA, we always talked about 1 billion is kind of the addressable market. But if you think of globally, the total advertising and commission pool, we're talking about 500 billion. And that excludes, the other services of the fintech world and like the mortgages and so on and so forth. Advertising is nothing else than a fixed cost on the commission. It's kind of taking a bit out of the commission check early in order to generate leads which help the transaction. So we should be rock stars on that basis. So maybe I should relativize a bit what I said earlier. Actually, when we look at it, prop tech only makes up 3.6% of these 500 billion. Classic prop tech. It's a bit a question of a definition because many agents are actually probably already far more technology savvy and should be included in prop tech but are not. Why is that? Why is it only 3.6%? I think it's due to 3 key reasons. Number one is sometimes we're not absolutely clear what problem we are solving. Number 2 is we are using technology, sometimes maybe too much being in love with the technology rather than really solving a real problem. And sustainability, since Zillow we know, one of the reasons why all these share prices also went down is, because Zillow's model was flawed from the start, and we talked about it 3 years ago, actually 4 years ago already. And it took, unfortunately, 4 years and lots of shareholder value being destroyed to get there. So let's start with the first one. What problem are we solving? What does the vendor or landlord want? Frankly, they don't want leads, they want results. They want a transaction, they want a sale, they want a rental. Yes, leads help on the way, but the belief that showering them with leads solves their problem, it only is helping them on the way to it. Also, a few portals around always talk about the transaction cost as their main focus, saying transaction costs like commissions and so on, they need to come down because that's what disruption is about. So disruption is a bit like the guy, nobody talks to in school, and finally, because he's smarter and uses technology, he has his revenge. So he destroys this 3% or whatever. It's not like that. It's not like that. The transaction cost might not be a good idea to do this too often to me. Where were we before we got rudely interrupted? Okay, we were talking about the transaction cost, the 3% transaction cost. The aim of somebody selling a house is to maximize the value for the property. And I'm selling my house at the moment, and I've offered the person helping me there above a certain amount, 20% commission. Why? Because for every 100K I have to pay 20K extra, and it's worth it. Because my net outcome will be much, much better. Because if you do the math, on 1%, nobody really will go the extra mile to get you another 100K for your property. So always think about the total net costs, a net gain you get from the house, and don't focus on the commission. The other thing is, what's the biggest roadblock? I mean, the biggest roadblock is still not addressed. I mean, we talk about more leads, better leads, more reporting on the leads, but the financing is still the number one hindrance in the real estate industry, or the lack of financing to buy properties. And the industry structure. I'm sure I get a question about whether we are a franchise or not, and so on. The industry is important, and each country has, over time, grown a certain industry structure. The second bit is scalability. Are we using the right technology? I mean, I've said earlier, it's not about more leads, it's about more income. I'm a strong believer in it's better to optimize, to do something end-to-end rather than partially optimize. It go too deep on one step of the whole value chain, which Malcolm had outlined. Does the best UI, UX win? Not always. I mean, it's nice, but ultimately, coming back to what problem are we solving? We don't have to be the prettiest. Look at me. You just have to be most suited for the situation. Ownership of data is another key point which comes up in these discussions. And many portals are too far away from the data because parts of the data are not theirs, also not the agents, it's ultimately the consumers. What portals do is they say we need to get closer to the transaction. I say we need to be at, or we need to do the transaction. Last bit is the business model sustainable? Well, I won't beg poor Zillow anymore. 9% gross margin was simply not enough to do the iBuyer model. I mean, we are having on every transaction about 35% gross margin. That is sufficient to cover your fixed cost base. I would never ever take inventory risk. And in iCar Asia, where I was the executive chairman, we never took on the value of the car. But when we sold iCar Asia to Carsam, Carsam is doing this, and due to their large scale, are probably able to get to the break-even position as a result of that. The other bit is, how are we generating leads is very important for a sustainable business model. If you're dependent on other people, there's a certain share of Property Guru dependent on Google and of ARIA dependent on Google in terms of the lead generation and the other channels, and there's new channels of lead generation emerging in social media and further advanced social media channels. The key is really, it needs to be sustainable. I can tell you openly, for our business, most of our leads are from social media. Same but different is a very, very popular phrase in Thailand, and this slide kind of portrays what this really means. YouTube and TikTok look similar on the surface, but TikTok wouldn't say they are a competitor of YouTube. TikTok would say they're a competitor of Shopee, of Lazada, of a transaction model, because video is not the aim is doing a transaction. And the same is true for WhatsApp and WeChat. WeChat is far more advanced because it does payment and all the other things in these solutions. Why am I saying all this? Because it's important for the sustainability of the business model to use the right channels. And if you look into the Southeast Asian markets, TikTok is gaining massive market shares, a bit hard to see, but the dark one, like in Vietnam or in Malaysia, reaches about 10% of the e-commerce per Google Trends. So, how can we be rock stars? I think nothing better than applying a bit of German philosophy. By now you should have picked out that I'm originally from Bavaria or Germany, and Germany always brought out these strange philosophers, either Karl Marx or Georg Hegel, and what they came up with is a thing called dialectic. And dialectic is a very simple principle. They say you have a thesis, something which is true, and then over time the opposite emerges, the antithesis, and ultimately the two come together. Now let's apply this and lift it more into the English world to the PropTech industry. So the old thesis was central online portals will disrupt the real estate agent and wipe out agencies. That's what we said, including myself 15 years ago, would run around and say we will disrupt it. Well, more and more agents are now coming up and saying we are controlling everything, we have the power, we are actually quite technologically savvy, and lots of these companies out here giving agents the power to be more digital savvy and become really digital agents. And I do believe ultimately it will come together in the synthesis. Online agent platforms are the winners, because that's what we are. We're not like an agency, we're not a portal, certainly not a franchise group, Scott Holmes. And now I talk a bit about what we actually do. Briefly on my past, and having thrown up these 3 different levels of portal, agency, and platform, I worked for REA with Simon. I ran a large agency out of Australia, which actually had elements of a portal, of a platform. Then iProperty, a portal, a platform in PropTech Group, from whom we hear in a second, and now involved with 2 platforms. One is Truva IQI and one is Made Comfy, which is a short-term rental platform out of Australia. So what is Truva IQI? On the left side, you can see the classic real estate office. On the right side, you see the modern real estate office, which is the phone. So we have, despite having more than 30,000 warriors, our agents are called warriors, we only have 44 offices across 22 countries. These offices are not there, for people sit on desks and, do shiny presentations and so on. Our agents have to be on the road. We're not a franchisor. We don't have franchisees. There's no principal and no office, but one platform. And I do believe the big disruption is actually not happening with the sales agent and the property manager. The big change will come with the office owner, because nobody really needs an office owner, and nobody really needs franchisor or franchisee relationships in the future. And I can say that having run one of the largest in Australia. So what is Truva IQI? It was born in November 2019. A merger of kind of a classified portal, Truva, overseas properties to China, and a transaction platform, an app-based transaction platform. So this is an end-to-end super app, or whatever you call it, used by 30,000 warriors. They're all branded Truva IQI. In the countries where license is required, we license them. We negotiate directly with the developers, put them up on the platform, and let people run. We are, and I am happy to make this claim, the largest PropTech player, because we're bigger than anyone else in revenue growth, profit, number of transactions, etc. And we benefit from the flywheels. And anyone who works in this business, like ours, whether it's KE Holdings or Samin or others, they probably have experienced the same flywheels, that the more buyers you have, the more buyers you get in the future, because you have more properties then, you get more attractive and so on. As we are platform driven, we see productivity gains. So in the first year, in 2020, despite COVID and so on, our agents had a 41% uplift in productivity. In fact, the last 3 years, we've grown substantially, and I've summarized that on one of the final slides. But first, let's talk about this platform, this super app. It does pretty much everything. Reporting, it administers all the stock, a marketing center, you can create an agent, a website or agent profile, which you can then blast out through different messaging services, landing pages, certain form of training are available. You can order your Truva IQI t-shirts. It does pretty much all. Like your team, you can communicate, and so on and so forth. So that's all in this one app. Yes, we also use a chatbot at the moment to help the agent to be more productive with reminding them of certain things and doing certain tasks like birthday reminders and birthday wishes to clients, and creation of certain marketing material. So what are the results? Last time we spoke, we did 7,000 transactions. Now last year we did 43,000 transactions. That's either a sale or a rental. We look after 800 developers now, and the number is growing. We looked after 140 before. Most of our business is primary, but rentals is almost of equal size to primary, because the way it works is you do the primary sale, then you're in the prime spot to do the secondary sale, because the person who bought from you first comes to you and asks you to do the secondary transaction, because you also have all the data. And if the person has bought from you for investment purposes, it's also most likely to do the rental via you. We have various applications for the rental, also like short-term application rentals, and so on and so forth. We reached break-even profitability in mid-2020, which was not easy, and especially during COVID. But now we are profitable, which is a very relaxed way of operating compared to the earlier years before 2019, when we had to raise capital to grow. So everything has gone up by 2 times, 4 times, or 6 times in these 3 years. What is the last hurdle from my perspective? I mentioned it earlier, financing and conveyancing legal. During lockdown, we were the only ones to operate in Malaysia. That's why the number 3, number 7, and number 9 agency came over and gave up and just became our agents without us having to pay for them. And that replicated itself 4 times in other countries as well. The number 1 hurdle was, however, we did all these transactions, but the banks wouldn't process them because the banks were old school. And the aim is to get really embedded into the bank or find other ways of payment for these properties. That would be not a core competence which we would seek, and we would work with fintech players around there. And conveyancing legal, again, is very, very important. We're doing electronic signing of certain types of contracts where we are allowed to via the app, but we cannot do a property sale because that needs to be stamped and all this stuff in many of our countries. So these 2 things are the kind of the missing thing for us to be really online, digital, end-to-end. Okay, I've come to the final stage of my presentation. I think we can all say, and we can conclude, while we are not yet rock stars, because 3.6% is not enough, we are emerging rock stars, and we can be rock stars. But I do believe in order to be rock stars, there is not the slightest sign of doubt that we need to do transactions, because we can do it better. Thank you.
Georg, thanks for that. Some questions. I'm going to start off with scaling. Right, you've gone from Juwai and IQI, 2 separate businesses. You bring them together. You've gone from in the 10,000 or even less salespeople. You're now at 30,000. How do you think about scaling businesses?
How do I think about scaling business? I mean, the most important bit is what is important for me is a sufficient gross margin to always generate enough cash to fund the investment into your technology. So like the way we are running it is we are generating cash, but we are literally investing it pretty much into the technology. We're not paying dividends yet. Number 2 is in terms of scalability, to have a blueprint for each country and a structure which is easily extendable. So, as I said, we're in 22 countries. We are monetizing 12 of those 22 countries now. The other 10 are where we let the operations slowly run, and then we take a stake in these operations and pull them across. They're all on the platform. I think platform is fundamental for scalability.
Okay, so let's dig a bit deeper in this scaling. When you talk about gross margin, how do you define gross margin?
How do I find gross margin? I define gross margin by the amount of money which I collect and how much I have to pay out to the agents.
And marketing, is that above or below the line?
Marketing is being done by the agents.
Okay. So
we are not spending $1 on marketing, but we are negotiating better deals for the agents. Also, social media marketing doesn't cost that much.
Okay.
So we are not doing much on Google AdWords and that stuff anymore.
So I think you mentioned you had a 35% gross margin. Does that mean you're paying out 65% to the agents?
That's right.
So the commission is 65%?
Yes.
Okay.
They don't get a fixed salary, that's all.
Okay. And that's how you drive scalability. Because the next question that was asked actually is, what is the nature of the relationship between your warriors and Juwai?
The nature is, I mean, we focus very much on a very strong culture. We license those agents. So agents get their license via us. We put them in different groups and put in place, oversight structures above them, but no principals. So, I mean, our structure is very simple. It's team leaders for teams of agents, and they have a team leader who looks after that, and then eventually it's a country head.
And they're exclusive to you?
And most, like I would say 70% of our developments are exclusive, yes.
Not the development, the agents?
Yes, the agents are 100% developed, 100% exclusive, yes.
And when you think about bringing of the listings and the buyers, to what extent do the agents actually bring that to you, and they're just using your platform as a way in which to transact?
On the primary side, we bring it in. on the secondary, like established properties, it's the agents who bring it in and use the platform. And that's why in this area, we share more with the agent, because for us, that's not so much the focus. We share up to 90% of the commission with them.
Okay, so 90% of the commission
Goes to them.
for secondary sales.
For secondary, so effectively, we keep 10%, and that's for them just to use the platform, but they still have to pay for the advertising.
Okay, then the other question I had is you look at the picture of the app, it looks like it does absolutely everything.
It does everything.
Right? But how do you get 30,000 people to get the most from the app?
By having 3 days a week training, either online or in person, where we drill in the same things and new things all the time. I mean, you have to really reiterate. I mean, you cannot rely on telling only once. You have to hammer in the messages.
Okay. Of course, question. To what extent will AI replace a lot of having the thinking process on how to use the app and what to do next?
It does in certain ways, like assembling simple marketing packages, like virtual marketing packages to send out and so on. We're using for that the Telegram chatbot to help us there. Yes, we're also doing like buyer matching with certain algorithms and so on. Yes, it helps. It definitely helps to increase the productivity.
Okay, because one of the things, and we chatted about in the masterclass yesterday about building these sort of businesses, is part of the objective is to remove a lot of the role of the salesperson from the process, automate it, so you become far more efficient.
Yes, because ultimately, I mean, in real estate, the salesperson doesn't sell the property. It is the property sells itself. The real estate agent in any country is there to administer the process and to help.
Okay, is it possible for you to add a service provider from outside the industry to have a dominant position in serving property portals?
I don't understand.
Okay. Yeah. Is it possible for an add-on service provider from outside the industry to have a dominant position in serving?
As I don't understand, I say no.
Okay.
No, it's not possible.
I don't know either, right?
I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry, I apologize.
Okay.
Yeah.
In which countries do you actually extract the average, the largest ARPU? I don't think it's ARPU, but I think it's probably the better commissions, the better.
At the commissions, I would say it's pretty common. I mean, it's around 4% is the average. And that's across all countries, yes.
Okay, across all countries, your commission is 4% of the sale of the property.
Sometimes a bit higher when, depends, some countries have these master agency structures where you get 5.5%, and then you can give a bit to other agencies if you don't have enough demand.
Okay, yeah. How do you try to solve the financing problem today?
How do we try to, by working with as many banks as possible, but ideally, I mean, the future is the properties need to be pre-approved by the bank, because the property can be approved at any time and assessed at any time. So the approval process of the mortgage then only focuses on the person taking up the mortgage, no longer on the property. So you can clear out all these things. That's the ideal way, and you sell the property already with a mortgage, which is actually, I mean, it's not the most innovative country, but in Bavaria, when you go to a bank sells properties and they come with the mortgage attached to it.
Okay.
How is that?
So when you say 41% productivity
Yes.
increase, how do you measure this?
Like in cohorts, like you see how many transactions people did in the past and how many transactions people do in the future. And that was in 2020, the increase during lockdown and COVID and everything. But we followed these people in terms of their data and how many more transactions they did.
So the basic measure is just purely the volume of sales done per salesperson?
Yes. We also saw a slight uplift in the value of the property, but that's very much dependent on the type of developments you take on also.
Okay. You do business in 22 countries. Where have you grown most in the last 3 years?
Malaysia, Vietnam, Canada, Australia, on an absolute basis, and then relative basis. Philippines is picking up, Cambodia is now picking up again. And also then markets where we don't have a presence yet. We're selling a lot into US and UK.
Okay. Now, the original premise around Juwai, for example, was cross-border sales. To what extent are your sales cross-border versus in-country?
It's probably in the current political climate a bit harder to really trace, exactly how many coming directly from China, because a lot of transactions are coming via Singapore these days. That's why Singapore is now the biggest purchaser of properties in or almost at a par with Australia and so on, in Australia with China. So I would say, in general, 5 to 10%, depending on the country, come from overseas, and of those overseas, half is from China, and it varies by country, and it varies also by development. Certain developments are pure overseas focused.
Okay.
Which one?
Let's
Do you see, I'm Belinda Bacon. Do I see myself as a franchise group? Not really, Scott Holmes, not really.
Okay. So
Seriously.
just minus the office and the principal. So
Yes.
it's a brand. You're not a franchise group, but they're operating under your brand.
Yes. There was one question in the earlier presentation about like what's the backlash with agents, and I mean we're a pure classify portal and went into this, and yes, some agents, I think Sotheby's or someone, really got upset, and we said, look, you're not actually the client. You're just an intermediary. The client is the developer. The client is the vendor. So as long as you focus on these customers, they have no choice but to either fall in line or find somewhere else to sell.
Yes.
So do not worry about the backlash. The agent is not your customer. The agent is only an agent. It's only an intermediary. Your customer are the vendors, developers, and individuals,
Okay.
landlords.
What marketing does the individual agent do, and how much do they spend?
It's very hard to say, but I mean, honestly, it varies so much. There is no clear. But in some of our markets, the agents pay it out of their own pockets, and therefore, it can be from a few dollars up to a few $1,000s. It really is that much a range. I don't have.
Okay.
an example.
And then what are the main challenges of managing thousands of warriors? Okay. And what's the churn like?
Churn is actually like the best way to control the churn is by ensuring there's always quality development available and so on. So the biggest challenge for us last year was availability of stock. We didn't have enough stock because due to the general election in places like Malaysia, developers pushed our developments into the future. So that we felt that a bit. So when people always say there's too much stock on the market, that is absolutely not the case. It's probably in the wrong locations. So selection of quality properties is key. Number two is bringing in new agents. We're not doing much efforts. They come to us because the brand is known, and everybody likes to work for a more global, international brand like Chuba IQI. But I would say the challenge is, or the opportunity is, we have to constantly develop new functions in our solution, but ultimately the financing, we need to crack the financing.
Okay. And then probably one last question is, you have a super app, but your agents seem to close 1 to 2 transactions. Is it per year or per month?
That's because the data which you saw, the 30,000, is a closing number, and the 43,000 is a number for the full year. So yes, but so that the number would be probably more like 2.5 transactions per agent. This is the norm in Southeast Asia, including Singapore. Actually, we are slightly above that, if you do the numbers.
Okay. How do you get them to become more efficient?
A certain group is already more efficient. So 20% is already selling 7-8 properties a year. And with the platform, with education, with giving them the right stock, and regular also building them up, building their confidence up. I mean, salespeople need confidence.
Yeah. Last question is, do you have exclusive mandates for new developments, and how important is it?
It's very important because you can charge more, and also, yes, we do in about 70% of the cases.
Okay. Fantastic, Georg.
Thank you,
very
Simon.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for sharing.
Rock stars.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.